Hello there, Bill Kenny here, joining you for the webinar, Everyone is Not a Prospect, How to Focus and Win at Trade Shows. We're really excited that you're here with us today. This topic in particular is critical for your long-term trade show success. And you'll see as we go through that this really is foundational and will help guide you to so many other great opportunities within your trade show experience. And just so it's clear, when we use the term trade show, we're speaking fairly generally about many different types of exposure events, and so it's an easy term to use that's generally understood. So with that, just so you understand the format of how we're going to go today, as you see, I'm on the screen right now. I'm going to switch over to a slideshow in just a few minutes or just a moment. And then late in the hour here, I'll switch back on screen and answer questions. So please add your questions on the right-hand side, and understand that I don't see those or won't see those until I come back on screen, but we'll certainly get to all the questions that you pose. So let's hop in. It'll just take me a second here to switch over to the slides, and we'll try this one more time. Okay, so let's go over to the slideshow and just put this on slide view mode. So yes, everyone is not a prospect, and this is actually a huge challenge that we see for many organizations. And what we end up finding as we work with organizations is our ability to help them get focused really informs all of the rest of their marketing, or much of the rest of their marketing. And so this focus really can considerably amplify the message that you get out. And again, I think you'll see this as we go through. So let's hop in. So here we are. It looks like a pretty typical trade show, and it's just that hard to figure out who here is a prospect. Unfortunately, none of them are labeled, and we sort of have to figure out on our own who's appropriate for us. So a big challenge of what we're going to do, and this may or may not be the right trade show to have selected, and then the second challenge certainly is, who do we want to meet? So you gave us many questions. We're going to get to these as we go through, and we'll stop at the end certainly to make sure that we've addressed these. So again, feel free to add more. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to give maybe a little bit of the background here. We'll talk about some of the challenges when a trade show effort is unfocused. And then we'll talk about buyer personas and how do we, number one, what are they? And then we'll discover who's appropriate for your particular effort, for your business, your organization. And then we'll apply the idea of buyer personas to a trade show plan, and we'll talk about some of the decisions we'll make specific to attracting those buyers, and then again we'll come back to your questions and make sure that we've done a good job there. So in any event, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and you buckle up here. We're going to hop right into it. So just so you know a little bit about me and a little bit about our organization, so you have context for these comments. My name again is Bill Kenny. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Meet, and we have, besides myself, many years in event experience. I've had about 30, and that's everything from being an exhibitor to being an event host and a trade show host, to doing what we're doing now, which is helping companies really leverage trade shows. So specifically what Meet does is we focus on helping growth companies and pavilion hosts. So often those are economic development organizations. We help growth companies and pavilion hosts effectively exhibit at trade shows. And that comes in the service comes in about 4 buckets. So the strategy, so both the sort of annual plan and then the specific event planning, the staffing, we help the executives get speaking opportunities, and then we offer a variety of sales support as well. So you may have more questions about that, and certainly happy to answer that, any of those offline. And we want to get into the topic and into the content here as quickly as we can. So let's get into the background of how we effectively exhibit at trade shows so that we have context for talking about buyer personas. So why trade shows? And we get asked this quite a bit. And there are obviously many different ways to market our organizations. And trade shows have a real unique attribute versus any other form of marketing. Trade shows are really the only one that at the outset get us face to face with our target prospect. So they deliver a very efficient way to reach that objective. Again, the challenge is that our prospects in that sea of people are not identified. So we need to come up with ways to tease our prospects out, and that's where buyer persona is really going to fit in. So trade shows are critical, and if we select the right ones, they're very high leverage. So the purpose of an individual trade show, and it's important that we kind of define these, because again, it'll help us make much better decisions. So specifically what we're looking for from a trade show is to identify and connect to volumes of quality prospects. So we want to make sure that we know who they are, and then we want to find as many of them that look like that particular profile. So when we use the word prospect, we often find that companies and people assign the term prospect to a lot of people or companies that aren't prospects. And so let's just take a moment and make sure we have a common definition for what a prospect is. So a prospect, very simply, is an entity, a person, or an organization that has a need. And this is a need that they realize, not that you realize. They have to realize it. They have money or the resource to solve that need. And then finally, they have urgency. So you may think of this as need, money, now is a really easy way to remember what a prospect is. And so, a prospect is not an individual or organization that has a need and money but not urgency, or urgency and money but no need. They have to have all three, or else they're not a prospect. If they have two or one of these attributes, they may be a prospect sometime in the future, but today they're not a prospect. So it's important that when we develop our strategy, we align that to finding people who are, or organizations that are prospects today. So an annual trade show strategy, if an individual event is meant to identify our prospects who are in the room, then an annual strategy is really about creating a steady stream of these quality prospects through the year, because we don't want to, sort of have spikes in terms of our prospect identification. Some, sort of spiking or small spikes aren't bad, but sort of major spikes, if all of our leads for the year come in March, that's probably going to be a challenge in September. And so how do we manage to create a steady stream? Really a key. So let's think about fishing for a minute, because this is really a great metaphor for the idea of focusing our efforts. So imagine that you want to catch a fish. Really simple idea. So, in each of our heads right now, we're sort of thinking of maybe a certain type of fish, or where we might fish, or that experience. And maybe we don't ourselves like to fish, but we can imagine it in others. So just so it's clear, there are 32,000 species of fish. So when we say we want to go fishing, if there were 10 people in the room or 20 people in the room, each of us would have probably a different image of what type of fish we were going to catch. And if we asked 1,000 people, we might get 1,000 different types of fish that we're aiming to catch, which really becomes challenging because there's a lot of different ways that we would go at catching specific fish. So this is, just to give you an example, this is a fish chart of Planacea, which is a city in Belize. And so this is just to show their indigenous fish to that region. And obviously in each region, in each city, in each area, there's going to be unique fish. And so it, we wouldn't use the same equipment or bait or methodologies to catch all of these fish or even any of these fish. And so we need to have, depending on which fish it is we're going to go after, we need to have a specific way to do that and method. So when we look at fishing, there's a whole bunch of different kind of equipment. The fish we're going to catch, we may need waders, or we may need a special set of lures or flies to be able to attract them. We may need special rods and reels and charts and so on to be able to find and catch our fish. We may need a vest with all sorts of, it looks like we're ready for anything with this vest, but we may need, very certain equipment. There may be hooks that we might need, or bobbers. And then we might need a boat. And I kind of think of the line in Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. But we there's so many, all we said was we want to catch a fish. We weren't specific. And so we could spend days or weeks sort of figuring out, maybe even years figuring out what equipment would be appropriate for the ultimate fish we want to catch. But the best way to get through this is to, number one, identify the fish, and that begins to tell us where to go and what to use and who to bring to connect or to catch that fish. And so if we think of our prospects like a fish, then we better figure out exactly what our prospect looks like in order to have the best chance of catching them. We have to come to the game prepared. So when we don't come to the game prepared, we find that there are a variety of challenges when the effort is unfocused. And it really kind of falls into three core areas. So the first is you select the wrong events, right? You show up to the wrong party wearing the wrong equipment. So we find when we do this that there are no prospects or very few. And so that can be a real challenge, and it will certainly waste our money and it'll waste our time, which for growth companies, certainly money is important. It's a critical resource, but time can be even more precious. The time either away from the office, away from customers, away from being on the road with customers and so on, is really super valuable. So the second challenge is you select or create the wrong offer. And what I mean by an offer is what you give. Some would call it a call to action, but it would be something that you give in the event. Let's say a trade show booth, something that you give in that booth that would attract your prospect. And so we don't want, if our goal at the trade show is to find prospects, we don't want to give an offer that's general. In other words, that if there are 10,000 people at the event, that all 10,000 would be interested in, or even 9,000 or even 5,000. We want to give an offer that only the 100 or 200 maybe, or even 50 who are prospects would be interested in that offer. So in other words, an offer that is specific to that prospect. Again, think about it like fishing. We don't want to put bait in the water that's going to attract all the fish. We want to attract just our fish. So what bait is sort of most favored by our fish, and what level within the water, are they a bottom feeder? Do they feed at the top? We want to make sure that our not only the bait, but where we put the bait is attractive and appropriate for that type of fish. So we got to have an offer that our prospect is interested in. So we think of bait, if we're going to use a lure like this is really meant to be on the surface. Then we shouldn't be going after a bottom feeder like a catfish. Or once we decide we want to catch a catfish, we need to use the appropriate bait that's going to attract a catfish. Really important, something that's on the bottom or near the bottom, because that's their bottom feeders, and that's where they are going to hang out. So we definitely want to have bait that attracts the prospect. And then you're sort of looking at this as well is, we sometimes will get this false positive, this sort of vanity metric around the number of cards that are collected, which in the end, what we'll find is that it will frustrate the heck out of our sales team. So as we interview sales personnel who go to many trade shows, one of the things we hear all the time is their disenfranchisement, their real anguish with regard to going to another trade show, because what they find is this exact problem where uh, you know the organization, whether it's the marketing team or the sales organization, whoever runs the trade show operation, what ends up happening is sort of there's the wrong offer. This wonderful stack of cards, or seemingly wonderful stack of cards, come back. It gets divvied up, and the salesperson starts making calls to people who don't have a need, they don't have money, and or they don't have urgency, and so they're not prospects. So the offer wasn't congruent with what would identify a prospect. One of the probably quintessential examples of a bad offer, and there are hundreds, but every trade show we go to, we see 5 to 10 companies offering or having a drawing for a free iPad or some iProduct, and which may be a good offer if you sell iPads or iProducts. I might argue that people that are interested now are not really early adopters of those products. They're probably laggards, and so that's probably not where you want to spend your marketing time. But ultimately, if that isn't what you sell, then the best sort of you're going to do in terms of your card collection or prospect identification is going to be to create a list of the average attendee. You're not going to create one that is specific to your organization and who you're trying to attract. It will be no better than a representation of the average attendee, which absolutely will not be satisfying for you, and ultimately not productive, and you'll get this situation where the sales team gets very frustrated because, and they don't know why, but they end up making calls to people that have no need, or money or urgency, which obviously doesn't create sales and doesn't create the impact you're intending. So the third challenge is that your team and exhibit are poorly prepared. And so making sure that the team and exhibit are aligned with who you want to attract is really key. So, right. So we might have the wrong presentation. We might not have whether it's the clothes or the setup or be in the surroundings that are right for the environment and what we're hoping to accomplish. So wrong presentation, got to get that right. The second issue within this is having the wrong language. And the thing I think about here, and I don't know if any of you all have had this same experience I have. I speak one language. I feel bad about that, but I speak one language. It's English. So when I go to a foreign country and I'm looking to order dinner or a meal, and English isn't common in that restaurant, then my only mechanism in my sort of insane, sort of lack of ability to communicate, is to speak louder. And unfortunately, that is usually not effective. And so we need to prepare. It's that sort of the presentation side is somewhat sort of the form. If you think of how we might do this, so it's the form. This would really be about the substance. So what is it we're going to say? In what language are we going to say it? And that has to align with who we're trying to attract. And so making sure that you can speak the same language as the people you're communicating with, and your team is prepared for that, and that your offer is in the language that they're going to understand, and that your booth setup is in a way that also communicates what you want to be heard. So let's get down to actually figuring out who our buyer personas are. And I think you're going to see that this is hugely valuable, and it's really not that hard to do, but will be exceptionally instructive. So first, what is a buyer persona? So real simply, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of your ideal customer. So it's really, and as you'll see as we go through, it is a, a persona or a personality that you can point to and evolve your communication around, so that when your communication is in front of the right audience, it makes a lot of sense. So then we better figure out what an ideal customer is if the persona is a semi-fictional representation of them. So an ideal customer is a buyer that you want to replicate over and over and over again. And so, the one of the kind of interesting examples here would be, if we can just think for the moment, we'll stop for a moment and just think about, um, let's just say for the moment, I have the ability right now on this webinar to give you more customers. We can, through the phone lines and through the internet, I can just pass you more customers. Now it's going to be your choice. I can either give you 5 more of your best customers, and I have them right here on my desk. I can give them to you. I can pass them right through the internet to you, or I can give you 100 more of the average. Now, what I ended up finding, and as I speak in front of groups, about 95% of people say, I would like to have 5% of my best customer. And so think about that best customer. If you wanted 5 more us of your overall portfolio of customers, then what would they look like? And for those that say no, I'd really rather have 100 more of the average, that's probably going to be a minority set. But let's just say, for example, I upped the ante a little bit and said, well, instead of 5, I'll give you 20 of your best customers versus 100 of the average. um, that generally, what I find is that gets the majority of everybody else on board, and there may be 1 or 2 that are stragglers, and that's okay. This is not a one size fits all thing, but now that we've sort of identified that we're going to be more efficient by aiming at our best customers, we want to really focus on this ideal, and what does that ideal customer look like, and how do we identify them? So you think of, for those that haven't seen the movie Pretty Woman, this is Julia Roberts after going on a shopping spree. She was somebody's ideal customer when she went shopping. And so we want to think about, our ideal customer. What do they look like? And we define ideal. No one else is, the goal here isn't to superimpose ideal on you. You may define them by, how much revenue they produce annually, or their profitability, or their growth rate, or, some other attribute, maybe their, geography, or the number of referrals they send you. Ultimately, the goal here is that you'll sort of figure this out and apply it to your business and your organization. So discovering the ideal customer. So there are 3 steps here. So number 1, focus on, if you have multiple products or services, let's choose one, and maybe it's the best selling, or the sort of largest, or the one you want to grow the most. Could be any of those. And then use historical data and your institutional knowledge to develop a sense of who your ideal customer is. And so think about, it could be what you would find if you have a lot of data, you'll end up seeing that there are groupings of customer types that rise to the top, and there may be specific individuals within those groupings that particularly rise to the top. And so what you're going to see is sort of an ideal being, again, could be an individual, or it could be a group of individuals, and maybe that group has, an archetype, a specific individual that is most clearly the best. So within that, if there are, often what you find is with any service or product, there may be multiple customer types or personas that buy that product or service. And so what we want to do first is identify the best one. Which one is, of all of the personas, which one is really performing best for you? And again, it's going to be us um, to identify or decide what best or ideal is. Our business or our organization may have specific goals that we want to use to make these decisions. So we want to be in alignment with our organizational goals. And again, we may favor those that are, sort of growing the most quickly, have the greatest revenue for our organization, have the greatest profit margin or gross profit dollars. Could be all sorts of different attributes. So there are, if we kind of segment a bit here and think about B2B versus B2C, and that is business to business organizations versus business to consumer, we're going to look at a variety of attributes. So if it's business to business, we might look at what industry that ideal customer is in, what market segment they're coming from, what their size is, how much revenue they do, what's their profitability. Are they geographically centered somewhere, or are they distributed? And then the mode. So thinking about mode is always interesting. So, and this can be one of the more telling things. So are they, uh, we usually look at four different modes. Are they in trouble? Are they growing? Are they even keel? In other words, laissez-faire, or are they overconfident? In other words, they're not overconfident. Usually says they're not going to be urgent, as does even keel. And then the unique dynamic. There may be some unique things that are going on in their world that particularly make them a great target, or particularly make them predisposed to wanting your solution. And so that unique dynamic often can be the most telling. Maybe they just just had some regulatory challenge, or they just went IPO. They just had their initial stock offering, or public stock offering. Looking at business to consumer, we look at a different set of attributes. We might look at their age, their gender, ethnicity. We might look at their sort of marital status. We certainly could look at income, net worth, location, and then mode and unique dynamic as well. So, again, we're really trying to define these individuals or organizations as tightly as we can, so that what we're going to end up finding is that there's going to be one or two or three of these attributes that are most telling, or that we really want to focus on from a standpoint of attracting more. And so it's not always easy until we map this out to know what the real driving attributes will be. But the first thing is to really map them out and get a sense of that. So, the ideal customer, can come in lots of flavors. Maybe we have young Asian mothers who are working, might be what we end up finding as a sort of principal target or an ideal customer. We also may find small and mid-market manufacturing companies that have recently gone through or are just going through a product recall as a target. It could be the gamut, but again, we want to use our data and our institutional knowledge to tease this out. Now, for a younger organization, you may not yet have the ideal customer on board. You've undoubtedly done enough work, though, to have a very strong hypothesis about who your ideal customer is. And so, what you want to do in this case is think about this as a hypothesis, and you're going to test um, your your hypothesis as you go to market, as you get out there, and you need to be open to learning and to being wrong and adjusting the strategy as you go forward. But you have to start somewhere and a, and a younger company, this is even more important because you have limited resources, you have limited time, you have limited money. So you need to make sure that you are doing small, inexpensive, both inexpensive from a time and money standpoint, tests so that you can quickly figure out who your ideal target is, who you're most efficient, and think of them as early adopters. So who are, even different than a more established company who has already sold the early adopters that are on to sort of the general market. A young company really needs to figure out who are going to be the people that want to lead, that need to have the something first, or that have such an exceptional problem that that they're okay with a solution that isn't yet perfect. In fact, they want to be a part of creating the solution and giving input. So our buyer persona and our ideal customer is going to vary as our company matures. It'll certainly vary as the market changes as well. As time passes, generally, you will find that these ideal customers change. And that's why keeping a pulse on this and refreshing this information periodically makes sense. Just as the available events evolve as well. So we're going to find that how we exhibit or how we participate in events will change, not only because our ideal target changes, but also because the marketplace will change and the types of events available and the specifics of each event will certainly change. So when we're going to assemble our buyer persona, the best way to do this, and when I say assemble, we want to be sort of catalog our maybe we have several buyer personas, or say 2 or 3 for each product, and we have 3 or 4 products. And so we want to sort of create those archetypes and that sort of vision of what that persona is. So the best way to do it, and the way that you can be most accurate, and in fact, the way that you can not only that, but retain your ideal customers better, is we need to know them well. And so when you have an opportunity, then once you've identified who they are, whether it's getting them on Skype or on the phone, or ideally going to meet with them, ask them a variety of questions. And these are some starter questions, but ultimately these are open-ended. We really want to hear from the individuals about a variety of issues. But 4 questions to start with would be, why did they buy your product or service? So that this specific product, why do they buy it? Or this specific service, why do they buy it? Why do they buy it from you? What was their world like, or what was their life like before they bought this product from you? So, what challenges were in the way that your product or service has alleviated? What's improved? What's changed since they bought your product? And are there additional opportunities? And this isn't necessarily, well, it may go into your buyer persona, but it's certainly, while you're there, you want to collect this information so that you can continue to evolve. But are there additional opportunities to improve, whether it's your company, your offer, the way you deliver your offer, all those types of things? So, again, these are just some starter questions, but we want to drill down into I think there's a variety of demographic information. There's a variety of goals that and preferences and interests that our ideal buyer has, the more intimate we get with them, the more knowledge we build of them, the tighter our buyer persona is. And the tighter our buyer persona is, the more accurate we can be when we go to make all the marketing decisions we need to make and all the product decisions we need to make. So the idea of focusing on a narrow buyer persona, this is an example of what a buyer persona may look like. And yours could be longer, it could be more detailed, it could be less detailed. But, it's everything from, the sort of demographic information about the person who makes the decision. So their age, their marital status, kids, education, and so on. You might have compensation. You could have all sorts of things in there. You could have past work history or jobs, and then what's their specific role? What do they do? What goals and challenges do they have? The goals and challenges really would be informative for when we go to develop our offer, and would tell us about all of this would really tell us about the language and presentation we'd want to use to appeal to them. And then certainly looking at the company and what their sort of size is, and then a sort of a variety of communication preferences and where they get their information and so on. And so all of this would help us identify what events, what organizations to participate in, and then when we do participate, how to communicate and what offers would be most meaningful to these individuals. So to look at a B2C buyer persona, and again, if you Google buyer persona for your industry, or anything like that, your industry or specific customer types, you'll see hundreds of examples of what a buyer persona may look like when you go and map it out. But this would be for someone who's more on the consumer side, but it's saying what is, and I say consumer, her issue is business travel. So it's somewhat B2B or slash B2C, but it gives her age certainly and her professional background, and then what are her frustrations? What are her goals? How is she motivated in terms of price or comfort, convenience? And it's for her, it's really all about convenience. Speed isn't key. Loyalty miles aren't key. But first and foremost is she needs it needs to be convenient and easy. Certainly telling how she prefers to communicate, all really key. And so again, you're going to, your individual buyer personas will undoubtedly look different, but they'll certainly have some of these themes in common, and they will help you sort of as we go forward here. So then how do we apply using the buyer persona to focus our trade show plan? So let's hop right into that. So the annual plan is we want to use the personas to guide us in a variety of ways. So our event search and selection, the event type and balance. So how do we distribute our events? Do we do local events? Do we do national or international events? How do we participate? Is our buyer more attracted by a key opinion leader? In other words, we should be speaking more, or are they going to sort of be more of a general attendee, and so we want to have an exhibiting space. We don't recommend sponsoring a lot, but sponsoring may make sense. Should we be participating in local chapters of various associations that we might join? Really key thing to do, particularly when you're in a younger company in growth mode. You'll find that the local participation or regional participation will be much more time and cost efficient and help you develop a really good beachhead and customer density in certain regions and or industries and or customer types that will make your business not only grow faster but more efficiently. So when we look at our annual plan, we want to take all of these things into account and choose the events and the types of participation and the modes of participation, so that it all aligns well with our buyer persona. And then we look at sort of, so we go from the annual plan and sort of looking at the event plan in general to each event specifically. And this could be a monthly chapter meeting to, small to a large to an international trade show. And so how are we going to participate? What if we're exhibiting, what floor location are we selecting? All of this should be aligned with who we're trying to attract. Again, just like if you're going to catch a fish, well, is it an ocean fish, a lake fish, a river fish? Is it in ponds? And so we better we better know the location. And if it's in the ocean, what depth does it feed? Do we need to be close to land? Do we need to be deep sea fishing? Are they on the bottom? Are they on the top or in the middle? And so all these things are really key. And then our buyer persona will help us and really instruct us on what offer would be most significant for this particular buyer. That would, again, the goal is that, if, let's say, the event has 10,000 people and maybe we have 100 or 200 prospects there, or maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, but it's probably not a lot more. Um, then we want, let's just say we have 200 prospects there. We want 9,800 people to walk by our booth and not stop. Our goal would be that only the 200 that are prospects stop. And so the more, and this somewhat goes to sort of the offer and the booth design, but the more things that we have in the booth that attract the general attendee, the less our prospects will see us. And so we might have a demonstration, we might have, some general information, and on and on and on. All of that will distract the person we actually want to stop, and they will miss what our offer is, and they'll walk by. So think of the offer a lot like you might think of billboard advertising, and billboards are pretty simple. When you talk to people that are experts in that field, yeah, they never have more than 7 words on a billboard, at least the ones that are effective, because people are driving by at, whether it's 20 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour. Um, and so there's not much time to digest that information, and they're digesting it against lots of other information. Usually billboards aren't alone in terms of, they're generally in fields of billboards, or where there are multiple billboards or other things the driver or passenger needs to be paying attention to. And so think of that just like somebody walking down the aisle of a trade show. There are lots of things that are catching their eye, almost like a carnival. And so the attendee needs to very easily and quickly know that what you're doing is critically important for them, and in fact that they put on the brakes and they turn right into your booth. That's really what you want to have happen, and your preferences really that the other 9,800 continue to walk by. So it informs your exhibit setup, who from your team you're going to take, and then how you're going to prepare them. What language do we need to have them speak? What's the value proposition for our buyer? How do we articulate who we're trying to meet when we're at the networking events and so on that so many of these events have? As we're meeting people and we ask them, why are you here? Who are you hoping to meet? And they reciprocate. We better be able to well articulate who we want to meet, and that will, over a couple day event, that will cause people that we met on the first and second day to steer people to us. And if we think everybody is a prospect, or we're more general, we will get very few of those referrals. Where if we're really specific, then we won't have a problem at all. Think of this a bit like you think of doctors and specialists. You know, just think of a cancer surgeon. Um, if somebody introduced themselves as a sort of a brain surgeon who is an expert on treating certain types of brain cancer, um, you wouldn't, if you were in an event in a big room and you ran across somebody who was having a foot problem, you wouldn't send that podiatry issue to the brain surgeon. And likewise, you wouldn't send somebody with brain cancer to the podiatrist. But unfortunately, most people go in and introduce themselves as doctors as opposed to specialists. And so not only do we need to be able to articulate clearly who are hoping to meet, we want our team to be able to do that. We want our booth to exhibit that. We want all the types of participation we might do at events to number one, display that, but also attract that specific person with the challenge. So when we go back to one of our example buyer personas here, as we look at this, we want to look at the event. We can use this to determine the event types, the modes, or the mode of participation, the offer that we're going to give, what events we actually select, how we exhibit and what we do in our exhibit. And then, and I apologize, it's obscured, but it also says team. So what team do we take and how do we prepare that team? It's amazing how this simple outline of a persona, and we're not, we have Jim here as sort of our operations manager persona. We could easily have Susan or whomever with unique attributes of an operations manager. But the key here is that we're looking to attract more Jims. We want, essentially, if we had a copy machine, we'd put Jim on the copy machine and we'd hit 1,000. We want 1,000 more Jims because Jim represents the best type of buyer for us, because he requisitions more work from us and refers more people to us and gives us the best gross profit looking over our customers for the last 5 years. And so we want more gyms. Pretty easy to be effective and to design your event participation when you can be this specific, because we know exactly what Jim's challenges are, and we can have an offer that only Jim or people that look like Jim would stop and be interested in. So as we sort of think about this conversation, we started with a big sea of people. And so by knowing our buyer personas, by getting focused, we're going to be able to identify the specific individuals in this event that we want to meet. And in fact, we're going to be able to select much more congruent, much more effective events to participate in, and our alignment will be significantly better. And ultimately, we will be able to catch the fish that we intend. So in this case, a rainbow trout, and we're not in the ocean for this. We're not, in deep sea or any of those types of things, and we're just on the edge of the river and using simple bait and all surface bait and so on. And so we're, maybe a fly or whatnot. But again, we had the right bait, we were in the right body of water, and we caught the right fish with the right equipment and the right preparation. So we're going to get to your questions. I just want to share our next webinar will be on how to find and select the best trade shows for exhibiting. And that will be on Thursday, March 15th at noon Eastern US time. So we hope you'll participate. We hope you'll come to that. We'll send out an announcement shortly. This content will be similar to this webinar. It will be for both growth companies and pavilion hosts. So feel free to share this with your friends. We certainly would love to have more. The more the merrier. So just so you have my contact information, feel free to reach out anytime with questions. We'll certainly follow up via email. but I'd be glad to have one-on-one conversations with anyone answering additional questions, or if you have interest in finding out more about what we do, I'd be glad to chat more. So it's Bill at Meet, MEET ROI as return on investment.com. Bill at meetroi.com. All right, I'm going to come back on screen and we'll get to answering your questions. So, and again, feel free to uh, add more questions on the right-hand side. Just use the chat feature to do that. So let me just pop back over your question. So the first question is, how do I identify the ideal prospect? So um, we we really just went through that process, but to refresh, the real focus here is use your history, use your institutional knowledge, all of the analytics from your sales over the last few years, starting with your maybe it's your highest selling product or service, and then identifying who buys that and who is the most valuable of the buyer types. And that really becomes your ideal prospect. And the more narrow you can be, the more specific you can be, the more effective you're going to be at replicating that buyer type, because that will inform and determine really all should determine all of your marketing strategy, including how you decide what trade shows or what events to do and how to participate in them and so on. And then this next question is, how do we figure out who to target? And that's really the same as identifying who the ideal prospect is. You're just going to walk through that process. Again, if there are additional questions, we can take them offline, and happy to work through that with any of you specific to your organization and to your goals. Um, Here's an interesting question. We get asked this a lot. Is it better to have gifts for every prospect or a few gifts to raffle? Is it possible to say none of the above? So the more that we do in our booth, and let me come back to this, the more that we do in our booth that isn't about the our ideal prospect, that buyer persona we're looking to attract, the less of those individuals will stop. And so I would suggest that your booth be simplified. And so number one, it's easy for that ideal prospect to know that they should stop. If you can accomplish that, the battle is 90% won. You might then, if you do have a giveaway of some type, you might reserve it for people that actually are sort of, and we don't want to do a lot of filtering. We want the offer to do the filtering. In other words, people that stop to take advantage of the offer should be the filter, and they opt in because they stopped and showed interest in it and wanted whatever the offer was, whether it's a webinar that's coming up or a white paper that you have or some type of assessment. There are all sorts of different types of offers that help find your prospects within a sea of people. And so the gift or the giveaway might be something that you give, it's behind your table or whatnot, and you just give it to people who, if you will, opt in. And so I would, if you're going to do a raffle, again, what you're raffling should only be of interest to your buyer, ideal buyer or ideal prospect, or else you're going to end up with a jar of cards, and we'll end up with that same problem where we have salespeople who are getting disenfranchised from following up because what they end up following up on aren't prospects. These are people that don't have a need, they don't have money, and they're not urgent. So the last question we have of the pre-submitted ones is, this person said they have no problem identifying who their ideal prospect is. Their challenge is in attracting them. So yeah, it's really important to be able to do both. So when we look at how do we attract them, and we kind of rushed through a little bit in terms of how do we make the right offer. We're actually going to have a webinar in the future that addresses offers, but to sort of give you the Reader's Digest version, you making sure that your offer, if you think about inbound marketing and the way that works, if you're familiar with it, if not, search inbound marketing, and you might even search inbound marketing HubSpot. That's a company that specializes in inbound marketing. They're really one of the principal thought leaders. But the idea of this is really that once you understand who you're trying to attract, then all of your content, everything that you put out into the marketplace, including your participation in events, needs to be aligned with the challenges, the problems, the opportunities that ideal prospect would be attracted to. Either, if it's a problem, what they'd be attracted to solving; if it's an opportunity, what they'd be attracted to take advantage of. And so once we have that, then we can begin figuring out an offer or something that we can promote that only that particular profile of individual, only that persona would be interested and attracted to. And really what we want them to do is, let's say, for example, we're offering a webinar and it's at the, and it'll be the week after the trade show. Is, we might have a very large sign, maybe some graphics that support that webinar and maybe supports the problem that that webinar solves. And the headline is, do you have this challenge? Are you subject to XYZ, regulation, which is maybe a new regulation that just came out that, your 200 people are trying to figure out, how do we solve this? How do we manage through this change? And if you've got the secret sauce or the magic pixie dust to solve that, then, promoting not your solution, but let's start with the problem. If they go, wow, yeah, I have that. How, I'd love to learn more about it. I'd love to learn how we can get through it. I'd love to learn how not to be up at night, which is really what you want to deal with, this, kind of what keeps your buyer up at night. And once you can communicate to them in a way that they go, wow, I have that problem. That is me. And I need that solution. Then you enroll them and they get into your process of lead nurturing, your process of communication. And ideally, they go from being a prospect through the sales funnel and become a customer. And that's really what you want. But the percentages get much higher in terms of our close rate, in terms of our time to close, when we improve the quality of prospects that we get through our event participation. And that's really what it's about. It's not just what our conversion rate is, but what's the value of our conversion rate, or the value of our conversions, and the speed with which we're making them. And so we want to sort of address all these things. But attracting, going back to the question, we want to attract these prospects, and it's by making an offer that only they're interested in. That, again, if there are 10,000 people, we find the 200 that are our prospects, and we allow the 9,800 to continue walking by. Ideally, it works out that simply. So again, really excited that you're here with us today and that you took this time. We're more than happy, and it would be a delight to chat with you, learn more about your objectives and what is really keeping you up at night with regard to your event participation. And certainly I hope you're open to that. We'll certainly follow up. So please let us know what other questions exist for you. We don't have any other questions that were submitted online, but certainly when we do follow up, or even sooner, please feel free to ask additional questions, and we'll go from there. But until we talk again, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you today, and hope you enjoyed this, and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye now.